Very good morning and welcome to this online policy dialogue, Fit for 2030, What Role for Road Transport? We're very pleased to organize today's discussion with support of the UK Presidency of the UN Climate Change Conference 2021. And we're joined today by a distinguished panel of speakers, including Maja Bakran, Deputy Director General from DG Move, European Commission, Kris Peeters, Vice President from European Investment Bank, Stephan Neugebauer, Chairman for European Green Vehicles Initiative Association, Julia Poliskanova, Senior Director for Vehicles and E-Mobility at Transport and Environment, and we hope that shortly Nigel Topping, high-level climate action champion for COP26, will also be joining us. Great, excellent, great that you're able to join us. As for the topic of today, reducing EU's greenhouse gas emissions in line with our climate targets will require addressing emissions from all transport modes. But we'll focus today on the role of road transports, which deserves our attention for several reasons. First of all, road transport accounts for around one-fifth of Europe's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's also a major contributor to air pollution. It's also an important sector for the EU, as the auto industry employs millions of people. And developments in road transport sector offer attractive prospects for business as well as society. And for example, different types of zero emission vehicles like electric and hydrogen powered vehicles will not only reduce CO2 emissions, but they will also improve air quality, thus bringing immediate benefits for people's health. And we should not forget that the demand on global market for innovative, clean transport solutions is growing fast, which certainly adds to the attractiveness of looking at the road transport sector. We look forward to discussing today the main elements of the new European Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, as well as the initiatives especially relevant for the greening of road transport. We also will be talking about the implications of increased climate ambition on road transport in Europe, as well as the possibilities and challenges with addressing road transport emissions in the EU. Before I give the floor to our speakers, and there are some practicalities, if you're interested to ask questions, there are two ways for you to do that. I'll give you opportunities to speak out after our speakers have spoken, and you just have to click on the hand icon if you wish to do that. And during the event, you can also use the space provided to ask short written questions. With these words, very happy to give the floor to Maja Bakran, Deputy Director General from DG Move from European Commission. How can European Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy help green road transport? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Annika. And good morning. Good morning to everybody. Good morning from Brussels. Big hello also to my fellow panelists. So what I'll try to do in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll just give a general introduction to the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy that we have, that the Commission has adopted in December. And then towards the end, I'll try to steer it more towards the road transport. So if I can please have the next slide. Indeed, as was already said in the introduction, sustainable and smart transformation of our transport system is an opportunity, but also it presents significant challenges. And we all live or have lived, still living throughout the last year, where we have seen what a severe impact the pandemic had on all of our lives. And in particular, I dare say on the transport and mobility sector. It's really been one of the sector hit extremely hard by the crisis. Just yesterday, we could also witness in the discussions at the level of the European Council how even our leaders are repeatedly forced to come back to these issues and really address them. It's in para 2 even of their statement from last night, the need to ensure unhindered flow of goods and services, within the single market and the need to ensure the green lanes system. So we need to continue working on the future of our transport system so that it can really quickly recover from the impact of this crisis, but at the same time really use this as a transformation to leap forward to a more sustainable, smarter and resilient future. So this is exactly what is the vision behind the smart and mobility strategy. And next slide, please. It really sets a roadmap, a vision for putting the European transport firmly on the right track for the future. Three main objectives: making European transport systems sustainable, smart, and resilient. And how do we do it? Of course, there's no single bullet to achieve it. We have set out a comprehensive action plan. There's 82 concrete policy measures at EU level, structured around 10 key areas for action, 10 flagship areas with some key milestones. So obviously, we will have plenty of work to do over the next years. There's also a very comprehensive staff working document with a number of really important elements in it. This is also result of our analysis of the 2011 white paper. So the strategy is out there, and let's look at its objectives. So the next slide, please. Sustainability. It's certainly the pillar, one of the three pillars of the strategy. Transport accounts for a quarter of EU's total gas emissions. It's not only gas emissions, of course, transport brings air pollution, other externalities, noise, congestion, and on top of everything, transport is the only sector where actually we are still seeing an increase over the recent years, an increase in gas emissions. So this is why we really need to charter a credible plan to achieve 90% reduction in transport-related greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. This is part of the effort, but transport has to play its role if Europe is to become a climate-neutral continent by 2050. So sustainability will be the driving force. Greening mobility will really be the only way that transport can grow in the future. So we really need to ensure irreversible shift to zero-emission mobility. So this concerns all transport modes. They need to become more sustainable. To do that, obviously, we'll need to make sustainable alternatives while they're available in our multimodal transport systems. And crucially, we will need to put in place the right incentives to drive this transition, such as fair and efficient pricing. So again, opportunity, but also a huge challenge, and that will certainly mean that we really need to significantly improve the efficiency of the overall transport system. And one of the possible ways, or probably the key ways to do that, is the second pillar of our strategy. And I would like to ask for the next slide, please, digitalization. It already is and will become even more indispensable driver for the modernization of the entire system. It has to be seamless, it has to be safe and more efficient. And this, again, will bring about reduction in emissions. So in order to offer seamless multimodal experience, we need to support sustainable choices, and we really, really need to take advantage of digitalization and automation. Automation is here, it is transforming our transport systems, and what we need to do is to see how we can additionally provide incentives for even faster development. So innovation will shape the mobility of the future. And from the Commission side, what we'll try to do is to really ensure that the right framework and enablers for this transition to smart mobility are in place. When we digitalize transport, we also have a unique opportunity to further increase levels of safety, security, in addition to efficiency, reliability, and why not, for sure, comfort of transport. This is what our citizens demand. So this is also crucial and will remain so if we want to retain our leadership in transport equipment manufacturing and services, and improve our global competitiveness. To round it all up, please, let's move on to the next slide. We have the key notion of resilience. And again, the last year has really reminded us of how crucial it is. We really need to ensure that our transport system is truly resilient against any future crisis. And this will also be very firmly on our minds as we work towards resilient transport in the future. So if we can move on, we really, I think there is still, isn't there another just behind? Yeah, okay. So what do we have to say about road? What is very important, and we have set out the milestones here. So by 2030, we see at least 30 million zero emission cars in operation on European roads. For this, we of course have to boost the uptake of zero. In order to boost the uptake of zero emission vehicles, we need renewable low carbon fuels, and we need infrastructure. So our objective is to install 3 million publicly accessible charging points by the same year, by 2030. Crucially here, interurban and urban mobility must be healthy and sustainable. So what we plan to do, so there is also, of course, this link to road transport, is to double high-speed rail traffic and develop extra cycling infrastructure over the next 10 years. Automated mobility will be deployed at large scale. Already today and over the course of the last years, we have been very active in investing in innovation, in deployment of various automated testing areas, and this is something that is coming. Of course, in this area, significant amount of regulatory work will also have to be done. Crucially, we need to implement the polluter and user pays principles and really to price carbon and put in place the right incentives for users. So we will pursue a comprehensive set of measures to deliver fair and efficient pricing across all transport modes, and certainly road transport, big as it is, will be a key area. And let's never ever forget, we will remain committed to bring down fatalities and serious injuries on EU roads and aim to achieve zero by 2050. So our vision for 2050, that all cars, vans, buses, as well as new heavy-duty vehicles will be zero emissions. So let's now move to the next slide, where you have also, out of the 10 flagships for the entire strategy here, you have the main ones related to road transport. I already laid out some of the details, but really one of the elements I would need to emphasize here, especially when we really try to boost the uptake of zero emission vehicles, is the significant need for investment. When you look at the transport European network, we estimate that to complete the Trans-European transport core network and develop it in a truly multimodal system with sufficient alternative fuel infrastructure, with digitalized roads, we would need over 300 billion euros over the next 10 years. So incredible amounts of money. Of course, we will only succeed if there is a proper combination of public-private investment, EU-level funding, national funding. And here we actually see a very good opportunity in the new funding instrument, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, that was developed, of course, as a response to the COVID crisis to really help all of our nations overcome the economic crisis and get back to growth. We are now in a period where the member states will start formally submitting their plans. We have been engaging with them over the last few months in informal consultations over draft plans, draft programs of various governments, and we see in each and every basically national program big elements, certain elements of transport infrastructure. So we are working together, of course, with a number of other colleagues in the Commission to also use this significant funding, especially in some member states, to bring it all together with the existing instruments and to really ensure this transition towards more resilient, sustainable, and certainly digital transport systems in Europe. So in conclusion, we have set out our vision for the decades ahead. We believe we have a clear plan of action in relation to transport, and it is comprehensive, it is ambitious, but this we believe is the only way if we really want to put the EU on the path to creating sustainable, smart, and resilient mobility system of the future. Certainly, all this can only work if there is support from all levels of government, if there is support from other institutions, and above all, support from stakeholders, from businesses, as well as citizens. So we are certainly counting on your support, on partnership to deliver this important agenda. The strategy was adopted on the 9th of December, and we are now, of course, in the implementation phase. The first initiatives will start coming out of the Commission, the first legislative proposals this year. We will have the first set of proposals in the so-called Fit for 55 package later this year, before summer. Of course, for you, probably quite interesting will be the Alternative Fuels Directive, the revision, and then we'll continue also after that with a number of initiatives. Of course, we will then have to work closely with co-legislators in the Council, in the Parliament, to actually really realize this vision. So quite some work ahead, but we are quite excited and happy that really, so to say, under our watch in DG Move, we are almost feeling physically this incredible transformation of the mobility system in front of our eyes, and we are really happy to be able to play our part, to play our role, and to ensure that we come out with a more resilient and absolutely sustainable transport system. So I'll stop here and happy to engage with you in over the next hour or so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bakran, and thank you for this comprehensive overview and laying out the vision and the ambition. It's certainly, I think, that we'll be happy to pick up on various elements you raised in your presentation. I'll start with focusing on the investment and the importance of financing the transition, as you recognized yourself that this is essential part of the transition. And in this regard, we're extremely pleased to have Kris Peeters, Vice President from European Investment Bank, join us today. And we'll be delighted to hear also how the European Investment Bank has been supporting and is planning to support the transition to sustainable road transport in the EU. Mr. Peeters, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Hedberg. I would like to start by thanking the European Policy Center for inviting me to participate in this very important online dialogue. It is important because we have big challenges ahead, and We are at the crossroads of an unpredicted crisis and of a climate emergency, and transport, like you have said, is in the center of both issues. And transport is one of the largest emitting sectors, and its operational energy use is significant, accounting for more than 30% of the total energy consumption for all sectors, of which more than 90% is oil-based. And the current crisis must be a catalyzer to meet the EU goals of being the first carbon neutral continent by 2020, where the colleague of the European Commission have underlined this very ambitious goal. And as a climate bank, because the European Investment Bank is a climate bank, we are upholding the challenging objectives to increase the share of its financing for climate protection and environmental sustainability to 50% by 2025. This, our ambition is also very, very high. And last year, we published the Climate Bank Roadmap, outlining our bold ambitions for climate financing and finance to back the European Green Deal and make Europe carbon neutral. It confirms the bank's commitment to decarbonize the transport sector and support the technological revolution. The bank is very, very committed, I must say, and to reap the benefits from these new technologies and to reach out climate targets, the EU needs to tackle investment barriers and accelerate the uptake and innovation of sustainable transport solutions. Timely investments will be crucial to drive down technology costs, increase efficiencies, support first movers, and create new markets. We need to enable more than one technological pathway to create real green options for the whole sector, as the investment decisions we make today will determine success or failure in the decades ahead. Even though road transport accounts for almost 72% of the total transport emissions, there is a credible decarbonization pathway for passenger cars and light vehicles, which currently accounts for about 53% of emissions in the transport sector. The decarbonization pathway for the road sector involves multimodality, efficiency improvements through digitization, and automatization, increased electrification, as well as increased use of alternative fuels. And the EIB group is playing a significant role in this transformation, as it has been supporting investments in these cutting-edge technologies. And I can give you an example, because we must be very concrete, of course. When you have very ambitious goals, then the question is, what is the concrete action? And the bank has already approved financing for almost 40,000 electric changing points all around Europe, and for more than 16,000 full electric, hydrogen, or hybrid vehicles. And in the past 10 years, the bank has invested more than 4 billion in R&D for greening the automotive sector. And last year, we have signed for 1 billion euro to support battery pilot projects across the EU member states, also thanks to Innofin, a joint initiative launched by the European Investment Bank Group in cooperation, of course, with the European Commission. In addition, the bank supported the development of 5G networks, a crucial milestone, I think, for automated and connected road transport. In a similar way as Innofin, energy demonstration projects in order helped the frontrunners with the development of innovative transport in EIB partners with the European Commission to create a financial instrument such as the Future Mobility, which allows the EIB to take more risks and help support innovative projects. I think that the technical and operational barriers can be overcome by offering capacity building, which is something that the EIB is already doing through the European Investment Advisory Hub and ELENA facility. And to conclude, our collective challenge is to foster green investments in the transport sector, and the bank will continue to collaborate with the Commission and provide support to make this happen. And I can be very concrete. We have now started the revision of the lending policy of the EIB in the sector of transport. And I hope that with the contribution from all the stakeholders, we can have a very new and very ambitious new lending policy in the sector of transport and mobility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peeters, for this overview. And obviously, we will continue to follow how the developments around the lending policy evolve. We've been talking about the ambition and we've been talking about the vision, and obviously what we have on the cards will have huge impacts for European car industry. And thus I'll be happy to give the floor next to Stephan Neugebauer, Chairman for European Green Vehicles Initiative Association. And we'll be happy to hear what are your thoughts on the strategy and what may be some of the concerns, hopes and expectations that you have going forward. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Annika. So my name is Stephan Neugebauer. I'm an engineer and I'm working for BMW, and it's my pleasure to join this panel on behalf of the European Green Vehicle Initiative. So the question is, are we ready for 2030? I think from the vehicle perspective, yes, because we are offering a lot of, as industry, a lot of highly electrified vehicles, the battery electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrid vehicles. They are available right now. For sure, we have to improve them and to make them better, but the offer is there. But what do we else need? We need the charging infrastructure. And here we clearly see a bottleneck. Look, we have committed targets for 2030. And it's important to be absolutely precise. The actual target is to reduce the CO2 emissions from new vehicle registration from 2021 to 2030 by 37.5%. That's it. To achieve this, we need to have more than 50% of the new vehicle registration in 2030 equipped with a highly electrified powertrain, battery electric powertrain, plug-in hybrid powertrain, more than 50%. So it's really, really, really ambitious, more than 50%. And this means we have to convince the customers to buy such a vehicle. We have to convince them because they decide. And can you imagine that someone will decide to buy such a vehicle if he's not sure where it can be charged? This will not happen. So when we are talking about 50%, more than 50% new vehicle registration, this means, because this is not only a shift in 2030, it is a ramp up of sales. So we expect that we need, on the way to 2030, around about 30 million electrified vehicles on the road, which needs to be charged. That's it. So if you buy such a car, you will charge it overnight. That's for sure, where the car is parked. So you need to charge it overnight. This means 30 million vehicles, 30 million options for private charging. And then you want to charge it at work. You stay during the day. And then you need some public charging. And the normal ratio is that 1/10 of the private charging should be public. So 30 million private, at least, means 3 million public charging. And when you compare this with the figures for the development of public charging stations, then you can see, just as an example, in Germany, we need 10 times more speed in the infrastructure development for charging. 10 times. This is what we are talking about. And I'm talking about the agreed targets. I'm not talking about some targets, higher targets, more ambitious targets for 2030. 10 times more investments in charging infrastructure. That's it. Just simple. The second question is, what are we doing with the existing fleet? Look, the whole regulation from on the European level and national level, it's focused on the new vehicle registration. But we have a vehicle stock, and we'll have it in 2030. And what are we doing here? And there's only one possibility to improve the existing fleet. It is to increase the drop in renewable carbon neutral fuels. And Maja, you mentioned this, it is the Renewable Energy Directive. As far as I'm informed about the ongoing discussion, my feeling is that here we could be more ambitious. There's room for improvement in order to improve the existing fleet in order to do more in 2030 for the climate. And this is a step we really should think about it very, very carefully without any ideological barriers saying that, no, we don't care about ICE because the combustion engine is anyway not the best. A third point from my side. Is a strategy BEV only, battery electric vehicle only, or fuel cell electric vehicle only? Is this enough? And I say no. Because in 2030 and also in the future, there will be some areas where you really have problems with the infrastructure. And you will have some use cases where the battery electric option is not the best one. I'm not against the electrification. Electrification and battery electric vehicles they are good, they are needed, they are perfect, fine. But we need additional solutions. And a very, very attractive solution is the plug-in hybrid of the future. And here I will give you some information about internal study of BMW, because we analyzed the driving profile from 200,000 customers. 200,000 customers in Europe. And when you look at this driving profile, you can see that 80% of the total driving distance in a year is done in trips which are less than 100 kilometers. And in future, we will see, and you can see this development on the market, we will have plug-in hybrids which are able to drive 100 kilometers in an electric mode. And if you combine this with a charging infrastructure where you can charge the vehicle overnight or at work or whatever, then you solved 80% of the problem. So it is important not to ignore this potential of the technology because of some preference in ideological behavior. We should just look at this, all the technologies which are important. So to summarize, I really think that we need to have a competition of the different technologies. There's not the one and only technology. We need the competition in order to achieve the challenging goals. And we are fully aligned in the climate issues, fully aligned. And we are able to achieve it with technology solutions. But we need to have it and to develop a climate neutral road transport, and climate neutrality is the important thing. So I'm not sure that zero emission is the right target. I prefer the climate neutrality and the competition of technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neugebauer. It's very valuable points you made there, and actually something I would be very keen to come back to the rest of the panel is on this question around existing fleet, for example, because I think that there are areas that will require further attention, and the transition, it will take decades. So we do have various issues that we need to address as the transition progresses. As our next speaker, we have Julia Poliskanova, Senior Director for Vehicles and E-Mobility at Transport and Environment. How optimistic are you about the current state of play, as well as on the prospects? And in your mind, does the European Commission's new strategy provide an adequate basis for reducing road transport emissions? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I'm sharing slides, right? So let me try and put them in full screen. Apologies. Not sure I am. Let me stop. Apologies. Sorry, my computer's been a little bit slow. Just 1 second. Here we go. So good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for inviting TNE to also present our views on this really, really important strategy that the Commission recently announced to make sure that our road transport goes and is on the road to zero emissions. So I will start first with some good news and some good points of this strategy, and then I'll come to some bad news and some concerns that we have as transport and environment. So I'm starting with a bit of a GIF image for all of you to highlight what a fantastic year 2020 has been in Europe. In fact, 2020 will really go down in history as the year of the electric car in Europe. It has been the sales of electric vehicles, and here we take all electric vehicles, therefore battery and plug-in hybrids, have been skyrocketing in Europe. That's no surprise, and it didn't just come out of the blue. It's a direct result of the European car CO2 targets that kicked in January 2020. First, we saw increasing investments into Europe, into batteries, into supply of these vehicles. Then we saw finally the supply, as Stephan rightly said, we now finally have choice for consumers, and therefore market has followed. People were buying these cars to the point where the sales have more than tripled to over 10% across Europe, and much more than that in many markets. It has not been the result of COVID incentives that just kicked in July, because we wouldn't have cars to buy if we suddenly had incentives. It was the result of the standards that drove the investments. Today, the car CO2 regulation is in effect the most successful climate regulation in the transport field. It's driving the overall transformation of European industry and is actually made Europe lead on volumes with China in 2020, which is pretty spectacular. We also saw a considerable increase in the charging infrastructure. In public charging is also increasing. Is it there? No, but it is growing, and it is driven by the demand for electrification. Now, these developments on the light-duty field are also trickling down to other parts of road transport, most notably to the heavy-duty sector. And in fact, we now see a raft of announcements and investments also into electric trucks. Electric trucks are on their way. And you can see here on the graph on your right, in fact, the number of models that all the different truck makers are bringing to the market. So today, electric trucks is also a reality. And I would really stress here that 60% of truck activity in Europe is done on trips below 400 kilometers. That can be easily electrified, and therefore in urban and regional delivery, electric is the most optimal and best solution, and there is certainly place for green hydrogen fuel cell driven trucks in the long haul sector as well. These massive developments in the market for electrification also have a really positive impact on EU gaining strategic autonomy in the key supply chain of batteries. So this is a little preview, in fact, from a report that we will be publishing on Monday around batteries and materials. What you can see here that to date, we have plans for at least 22 gigafactories to produce batteries in Europe, producing up to 460 gigawatt hours of battery capacity by 2025. This is even better than the initial announcements of and commitments of the European Battery Alliance. And they are everywhere across Europe, and Eastern Europe and Central Europe is specifically benefiting from industrial opportunities here. But that's not just that. If you look on the right, what you see is, in effect, the planned EU-made batteries and their supply is more than enough for the current targets we have in legislation. So if we actually just leave the current CO2 targets for cars, for example, we will be nowhere near 30 million vehicles, first of all, for 30 million zero-emission cars in 2030, but also we will actually be building much more capacity than we need. So we can go much, much more. The Commission scenario, which we call here Enhanced 2030, whereby we'd go to a 50% reduction in CO2 from cars by 2030, still is way below of what we can achieve. And even our T&E scenario, which is higher targets in 2025 and 2030 to at least 65% reduction, still leaves enough European capacity in batteries in 2020s for trucks, for storage, and so forth. So it's a great story on homegrown industry, and it is now an industrial opportunity for Europe. But of course, there are a number of buts, and I would outline at least 3 areas that we see as considerable risks for Europe going forward. And in fact, where we see that the language or commitments in the sustainable and smart mobility strategy are not going in the right direction. First and foremost, it's just the current regulatory design of the car and van CO2 standards. We very much welcome their review, which is coming in June, and that's been confirmed in the SSMS strategy as well. But if we only increase the 2030 target, we will actually not see much on the supply side of these vehicles in Europe until 2030. If where we are today, and we went much further than we thought with electric market in Europe, so we're at 10.5%. If we continue the current growth to how we've seen it in other markets, for example, if we continue what happened in Sweden or in the Netherlands, we would reach in 2 years' time the ambition of the current 2025 standard. And remember, that ambition is in place until 2029. So there is absolutely no driver for more European supply of electric vehicles until 2029. That is a huge risk of a lost decade. If we don't ramp it up in the 2020s, there is no way we can go to such high ambition in 2030 or 2035, because it needs to be ramped up accordingly, with infrastructure ramping up, with consumer choice, and taking people and supply chains with us. So what we need to have a clear trajectory to zero in 2035 in the light duty sector. That means higher targets from 2025 onwards, really importantly. This also means that we need to set the date when the market has to go zero emission. I agree there should be competition between technologies, and maybe it's something we'll cover later in questions, but the competition should be among zero emission Green Deal compatible technologies, not technologies that today, on the current information and the current performance that we have, such as current plug-in hybrids that emit more CO2 than the cars they are replacing. So yes, competition, but for climate compatible technologies. So if we set zero in 2035, the reason why it's so important is that we can start preparing today. Yes, there are a number of voluntary commitments already from Jaguar, from Volvo, from GM, from Ford, but we can't just rely on voluntary commitments. Europe has to set it as a goal for itself to make sure that everyone goes to zero, and more importantly, that we prepare in time. Jobs transition, supply chains, charging infrastructure. That goal allows everyone to go in the same direction instead of losing sight of where we are going. And really importantly, and I very much agree, of course, with Stephan, is that AFID directive and infrastructure is very, very important. We sent a joint statement, in fact, to the European Commission, together with consumers and the European automotive industry, to ask exactly that. It's great that we mention 3 million public charge points in Europe by 2030, but let's make it a reality. Let's make it into binding targets in the AFID regulation. We hope it will be regulation because it will be much easier to implement consistently, so that we don't just see charging in the Netherlands or Norway, but we see the same amount of charging ramp up in countries like Poland, Romania, or Italy, for example. So regulatory risk is the first one. The second one, and I'd like to spend also a little bit of time here, is a new risk for Europe to actually rely potentially on fuels in the road transport, and include and mix fuels into what today is a really effective CO2 regulation aimed at powertrains. Now, don't get me wrong, as TNE, we see a huge role for low carbon fuels, so e-fuels done with green hydrogen and direct air capture to produce electrons. That's very important. We need them in the sectors where there is no alternative. Aviation and shipping, for example, or heavy industry, chemicals, steel, cement. We need them there, but we don't have them today. They're incredibly expensive. They require huge amounts of renewables to produce. So when we start getting small amounts of these fuels in 2030, we cannot waste them in the road transport sector, where better alternatives exist. In fact, road transport cannot be stealing the electrons that are needed in other sectors to decarbonize. And if we do use them in road transport, we have huge problems with affordability, because these fuels are significantly more expensive than direct electrification. And you see here our analysis on the left, where we show that as soon as 2025, it will be much cheaper to comply with car CO2 standards with battery electric vehicles than e-petrol or e-diesel. We very much support life cycle considerations. We are addressing life cycle emissions in Europe, but in different regulations. ETS for power supply, new battery regulations, fuel quality directive, and renewable energy directive for fuels. But it is not feasible to place the entire European economy in car CO2 regulation. That will be a vain regulation and not enforceable. And therefore, it's crucial to keep fuel credits out of the vehicle CO2 standards and discuss them where they belong, so in the renewable energy directive, for example. If not, we will delay electrification, and it is a huge risk. And last but not least, another risk that we see is around the current discussions on adding road into the ETS, so into the carbon pricing mechanism. Again, carbon pricing is a very important environmental tool. We very much support that. We need it in sectors where nothing exists today, so aviation and shipping again. But we have to be clear about what carbon pricing can and cannot do. It can raise revenue. It can drive people to the streets, that's for sure, with higher fuel prices, but it cannot deliver huge emission reductions in road transport sector or drive as fast as the car or van or truck CO2 standards electrification. And in fact, now that we have committed to 55% reductions by 2030, we must deliver. That means that whatever mechanism we choose in the framework, in the so-called architecture of Fit for 55, needs to deliver. It needs to deliver on environmental side, so it needs to deliver the reductions, and it needs to deliver on the social side, because it needs to be fair to lower income member states and poorer households. If you put road transport into the ETS, to be environmentally sound and robust, you must allow the carbon price to rise as high as necessary to deliver the reductions. That will be huge spikes in fuel bills across Europe, and it will not meet the second condition. It will not be socially just. And in this way, vehicle CO2 standards is the most effective and socially just measure to decarbonize road transport, because you target the markets that can buy new vehicles, companies, for example, fleets, people who can afford new vehicles, instead of targeting those that cannot afford today to switch to electric. So I'll stop here. There's some of our views, and I very much look forward to the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very clear message, and I'll be happy to come back to the panel, for example, on the question around ETS and see what kind of views there are on this. As our last speaker, we have Nigel Topping, the high-level climate action champion for COP26. We've obviously been talking quite a lot about what's happening within the EU. And it would be great to hear, obviously, from your perspective, also listening in, what is happening? How do you see, how could the EU best contribute to raising global ambition in greening road transport, also globally? Thank you, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Annika. I've been listening intently and learning a lot. It's really fascinating. For those of you who don't know, my role as high-level champion it was a role created in Paris to work with what the convention calls non-state actors, so businesses, private sector, investors, cities, and regions to try and drive action much faster. And we often think in terms of what we call the ambition loop, that we really need strong policy that changes behavior in the private sector, but then also more ambition and action in the private sector can embolden policymakers. And that's a very simple way of saying this is a systemic transformation. And actually, I think this sector is probably the best illustration of how systemic industrial transformation, every time it has happened in the past, and I would say every time it will happen in the future, and is happening now, follows the well-known S-curve. So we think nothing's happening forever, and then suddenly it goes exponential. And Julia's first slide showed that exponential. And I would say it's not just about policy. If you think of the story of light vehicles in the last 5 years, when we woke up after the dream result of Paris in early 2016, the IEA was still saying that around the world we'll be producing and buying lots of combustion engine cars into the 2070s. It's hard to believe now, right, that anyone was so stupid as to think that we would be building combustion engine cars in the 2070s. Then what happened? You think of the story of systems change. You have Tesla disrupting, making people realize actually electric cars can be pretty fast and pretty cool. All that talk, right? All those YouTube videos of Teslas outrunning Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and then you have the UK and France announcing 2040 phase-out dates. You have some of the biggest cities, Paris, Amsterdam, London, and others creating zero carbon or ultra low emission zones, which sends a demand signal. I know I was on the board of the London Pension Fund when London announced its ultra low emission zones, and suddenly you have all these small and medium-sized enterprises who are outside London saying, where can we buy the electric vans that we're going to need to deliver in the ultra low emission zone? Then you have major fleet owners like LeasePlan, biggest fleet owner in Europe, nearly 2 million vehicles, saying we'll be 100% electric, because they're thinking in cost of ownership and they can see the writing on the wall. You have millions of kids taking to the streets, demanding a cleaner future. You know, none of them are going to buy polluting vehicles. Then you have the success story of Norway, and suddenly you've got California saying 2035, which probably means the whole of the USA. And then just last year in my country, in the UK, we had this most amazing situation where the government said, we're thinking of bringing the date forward from 2040 to somewhere between 2032 and 2035. And two of the loudest voices from the private sector calling on responding to that consultation were two oil companies, Shell and BP. So this is a consultation about killing one of their major markets between 2032 and 2035. And what did they say? They said, do it in 2030. Really counterintuitive. Why would a major company say kill my market earlier than you're even concentrating? Because they know it's going to happen and they want to remove the uncertainty so that all of the risk is taken out of their capex. And of course now, just as Julia and others have mentioned, in the last few months we've had ASEA saying all the European truck manufacturers are committing to zero emission trucks in 2040. And we've had Ford, General Motors, Jaguar, Land Rover. So this is the S-curve happening. It's systemic change happening. Everybody's influencing everybody else and getting more and more confident that the future is net zero. So this is now an inevitable transition that's happening really fast. Just 2 years ago, Mercedes was the first vehicle manufacturer of the incumbents to say net zero by 2039, and now everybody's joining in, although not all the European manufacturers have named their own net zero date, which is something which would be good to see. For me, what this is now about political credibility and industrial competitiveness. You know, if you're going to say you're a leader, you have to lead. If you're a leader, you've got to be ahead of everybody else. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think there's so much great in this EU strategy, but I think it's already out of date. I know that's harsh to say, but you know, if I heard you right, you're saying net zero heavy vehicles in 2050. Well, you're already 10 years behind the industry. That's the nature of this kind of change. As soon as you have a plan, the rest of the world goes faster. So you've got to keep ratcheting your own. I think that I'll just end by really echoing what Julia said. I think that there's an inevitability that all these transitions are going to happen faster. And so it's a question of whether in Europe you want to be satisfied with the pace of change you've got at the moment, which will get you to where you want to get to, or whether you want to ratchet in order to make sure that you're at the front of the competitiveness curve. You know, the biggest mistake that the American automotive industry ever made was in the 70s in the oil crisis, when they thought they were big enough to determine the shape of the technological trajectory, which is why now a lot of cars on America's roads are European or Asian, because in Europe and Asia, I as a young engineer joined the automotive industry in the late 80s, just as we were realizing that transition was continuing. So I think I would urge you to make really clear zeros and hundreds. 90% is, you know, if you say 90%, about 40% of people think they're in the 10%. There's a real purifying power to zeros and hundreds that unleashes the power of engineers. You know, have faith in your engineers. Don't set them goals that you know they can achieve. Set them goals that you don't know they can achieve. That's the spirit of the moonshot. When JFK in 1961 said, we're going to land on the moon, the best mathematicians in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology said, that's impossible. We don't even know how to calculate the orbital trajectory. We don't even have the mathematics. So Kennedy didn't say, okay, let's do it in 20 years. He said, no, we're going to do it by the end of the decade. And what happened? Within 2 years, they'd figured out the orbital mathematics in order to be able to calculate that. I think that you can see evidence that the likely endpoints are 2025 for buses. We've already seen in the UK, 2 of our major bus companies say they'll never buy another diesel bus. We see huge momentum in Latin America, big initiative with cities committing to electric buses. I think 2030 is a much more likely date for cars. Why have Ford? I mean, I worked in Leverkusen, just outside Cologne, for several years. So it's a delight to see Ford committing to being 100% electric by 2030. And again, I think trucks is much more likely to be 2035, given that the European industry have already said 2040. So I really welcome the clarity and all of the deep thought that's gone into the current policy framework. I think that really helps the private sector know what they've got to do, and it helps drive that S-curve. But I think you'll find yourselves within a few years having to update the targets as the private sector and cities and citizens and investors keep driving that exponential change, which Julia showed in her first graph. But with Gonzalo Munoz, my fellow high-level champion, we're driving what we call the race to zero. We're seeing nearly all of the major car manufacturers are now committing to net zero, so they're in the race to zero, and we're focusing much more on what needs to happen in the next 5 years. So I think some of the points which Kris makes and others have made about the need to ramp up infrastructure, so that and I think Julia's graphs about batteries really encouraging. And I think some of these other big questions about what happens to existing fleet, how do we avoid dumping old unsafe vehicles in Africa, which is a concern. How do we make sure we have the supply of the raw materials for batteries and for electric motors, will become the really big questions to make sure we don't find that we come up against a bottleneck to keep that exponential change towards a clean air and zero carbon future. Thank you, Annika.
Thank you so much. And I very much liked this optimism and this call for the race to the top and race to zero. And this really is a big question, obviously, for Europe. What is Europe's role in this? Are we going to be leaders? Are we going to be showing the way? There's been so many different elements, but before I take questions and give a chance for our audience to come in with their questions, I'll be happy to give Ms. Bakran a chance to respond, as there have been a lot of comments and also questions that you may wish to respond to.
Thank you indeed, and thanks everybody. I mean, I think you really managed to assemble a great group. Well, a few comments at this stage from my side. First of all, please do recall what I said at the very beginning of my intervention. There is no single bullet, really, especially at this stage. But we are, I mean, transformation is there, but it's still in some sort of an early phase. So for this, we really need to, how shall I put it, plastically shoot from all weapons. And this is why the strategy is foreseeing, as I said, a number of actions, 98C, let me double check, 82 different measures. Another thing I would also like to immediately clarify, the strategy is technology neutral. It is not, when we speak about road transport, it is not taking sides for batteries or something. It is technology neutral. We have a period ahead of us, no matter how fast we in the end manage to go, and I'm pretty sure we'll go pretty fast, there still is a transition period. So we have to really take into account all the existing technologies, and as I think, Stephan, it was you who called for it, absolutely allow for this competition. And of course, the goal is to achieve zero emissions. What I would also like to highlight here, the strategy, it doesn't all begin with the strategy. For years now, we've been working together with other colleagues in the Commission on different initiatives. So the strategy is sort of a moment in time where we were also able to bring it all together, but also to give an additional impetus. The old transport white paper is for 2011. We actually, in analyzing it, saw that many of the policy directions are more than valid. So we didn't go with a major new white paper, which I think, Nigel, you mentioned it, things are just moving too fast. If we were to, with all the procedures and everything, develop a new white paper, we just don't have time for it. It's moving extremely fast. So the strategy is a moment in time. We put an extra effort in it to really reinforce the message where the EU level will be going, and we see with the developments on the ground, as so beautifully illustrated by Julia, that everybody is getting this message. Everybody is responding to what was being done here for the last few years, with the, in particular, such a top priority for von der Leyen Commission to reach the climate neutrality. And we are very happy with all the developments we see on the ground. Of course, on top of everything, two final comments. I already mentioned Kris, of course, is fully involved in it. We really need to support with investments, especially now as we hopefully soon start coming out of the COVID situation, but this will leave a lot of economic scars in a lot of our countries. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, let us also constantly keep in mind that no matter how ambitious we here in the Commission are, or you fellow members of the panel, this in the end has to be agreed by the member states. And there, I have to say, we don't always see the same level of ambition. So let's also be realistic and do what is possible. And personally, I'm sure that indeed we'll continue to see these strong increases. It's also the demand of our citizens, and no single government will be able to not reply to it. But let's also be realistic. And also when we talk about road safety, I mean, excessive speeds are also not very safe. So we'll get there, but in a realistic way. And we are really happy to see that it is already irreversible. Now it's all of our job for all of us to really frame it and continue working all together.
Thank you so much. We have several questions already in writing, and I see one hand up. I'll take first, I'll combine two of the questions that are there in writing, and Silke Konrad, my colleagues will shortly unmute you, so be prepared. So the first question I'll take, and there are actually two that both relate to reduction in car use. It's both Thomas Limes. He asked that since an electric car will still be a car on road contributing to congestion, what are the ambitions of the Commission regarding the reduction of car use, especially in an urban environment? And what kind of support can cities expect in that regard? And Matthias Rüte had a very similar kind of a question, that if we look at studies done on internalization of external cost, congestion is a major factor, and how can we deal with that? And his impression was that in the discussion today, we're not dealing enough with the change of the transport system as a whole. And so now I'll come to Silke Konrad. My colleagues will unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you.
Thank you. So yes, right. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Silke Konrad. I work with Daimler. I'm the head of EU regulatory affairs for trucks and buses. Well, first of all, for this, great presentation, and obviously, I would like to support my colleague from BMW. What has been said. I really like to transport and environment's always very passionate, but I would just like feed it in some market realities. First of all, a higher targets is in the pipeline for 2030. 2025, does it make sense? No, very simple. It's just, we have a product cycles. This is just market reality. This is not something that we invent. Of cars of about 7 years, trucks is about 15 years. So this has to be somehow taken into consideration. We just finalized 2019, the first CO2 legislation, changing legislation every 2 years. We need a stable framework. Changing them every 2 years is not going to help. A second point is, as long as we don't have the infrastructure, we're not going, it doesn't make any sense to put higher and higher targets, but the infrastructure is not going to pop up by themselves. Your target is 3 million charging station by 2030. Today, I just looked it up, we are around 225,000 in Europe. So if you make a quick calculation, that sort of means that until 2030, Europe will have to build every day without holidays, every single day for 9 years, around 800 charging stations. This is just not going to happen. So we still need somehow some reality that has to be taken into account. And I know this is obviously, we agree with what has been said on binding targets, fully agree. We need that, we need binding targets. Game is now in the Commission to convince the Council to agree with that. And I know it will be very difficult, but I think what is important, if we set higher targets, please combine them, sort of put everything together, that it will depend on the infrastructure, it will depend on the incentives, on taxation. We have the energy taxation as well in the revision. The same here, it's going to be a very difficult discussion because we need unanimity. So I think this is just very, very important to have this interlinkage between all those legislation. It doesn't, just putting higher targets, we can put them on the market, but if nobody's buying them because there's no infrastructure, especially for the heavy duty, there's just no infrastructure, there's nothing. So, we need hydrogen and we need charging infrastructure, but it's not going to happen overnight. And so I think, even though, obviously higher targets looks very good in the headlines and on Twitter and in the press, but it's not going to help move us forward, because in the end, we need our customers to be able to use them. And if they can't use them, they're not going to buy them. So I think this is a very important point. We are not against, as you said, we had this pledge. We were trying to have climate neutrality in the future. We as a company as well, by 2039, we are really, this is a development that's happening over the years now with all OEMs, but please, let us the time to do it and do it right. I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can just build up on that. And so we hear a lot about these charging stations. And so the question is really, how can we also accelerate and that we have these charging stations in place? But I would like to add in there that how can we also do that in a way that encourages competition between operators in this space? Because there are a lot of interested operators who are keen to come and support. And so how can we make sure that they all can be part of this transition? Who would like to go first? And maybe I'll hand over to Ms. Bakran first. And
yes, thank you very much. I'll try to combine the my comments to the question or comments we've just heard, and then the questions in the chat. So first of all, I mean, of course, on the charging stations, if we remember what Julia has shown us, if I remember very roughly, from 100,000 charging stations, we went to 200,000 in more or less a year. So we doubled. And yes, we do believe it is possible. We'll see incredible increase. And this 3 million, personally, I'm quite certain we'll see them much sooner than the end of this decade. And here again, a reference to the Recovery Resilience Facility, which also all the spending there will be linked to also climate fight against climate change. So here we'll have some pretty important developments. Having said that, of course, and I said it myself, nothing happens overnight. There will be a transition period. It'll not be an empty period where nothing will happen. So we really have to all work very hard. And this is exactly what we try to address with our strategy, to bring this all together. No silver bullet, a number of changes. On the upcoming actions, indeed, we are, because things are moving fast. We cannot wait. There will be a proposal to revise the CO2 standards for cars and vans already in June, to be followed by a review of CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles foreseen for 2022. When it comes to ETS in transport, we are looking at it. I mean, it has to be put on the table. We have to analyze it and then see how to proceed. Very important thing is highlighted by Matthias Rüte in the I don't know if it's our former Director General, but certainly a namesake. We probably need another webinar to address this subject. And one of the flagship initiatives we have out of the 10 is the urban mobility, to make it more sustainable and more healthy. Indeed, it is not, maybe today's discussion, you got this feeling that we are only talking about the mode of propulsion, but it is really about changing the transport system as a whole. And it's not that we just like that change it and impose it from the above. It is changing all around us, and we need to raise to the challenge. We have the new generation who have completely different ideas. I remember when my son turned 18, my husband and me, we all jumped at him. Okay, now do you want to do your driving school? He said, no, why would I need to drive? I have Uber. This is the new generation all over the place. So they will not want to own the car, search for the parking space, sit in congestion streets. At the same time, they will want to have a service. So things are changing. And indeed, what we are discussing, what we are trying to also illustrate with the strategy and act upon it, is change of the transport system as a whole. It is a system, and we have to look at it as a whole, even though today we are focusing on road transport. I'll stop here. I hope I addressed at least some of it.
Thank you very much. And so we have both Julia and Stephan wanted to jump in. Julia, you can go first.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Annika. So maybe a few replies to the questions. First of all, to some of the things that Silke was mentioning. So First of all, on the targets, since it was really directed at my presentation, maybe I'll respond here. Look, I think the point is not about just changing targets for the fun of it. The point is that our targets are completely outdated. They're nowhere near where the market is going and what is happening. But at the same time, on the other hand, the reality of today's car market in Europe is that the supply of vehicles is governed directly by the CO2 standards. So car makers are not, and we have a lot of data to that, are not bringing more electric vehicle on the market than they should to comply with the standards. So as long as it's regulatory driven, to make sure that European companies invest on time and produce that supply, we need to increase the targets. You can say, well, you know, the market is going, the market is actually really growing, and people are waiting in queues for 6 to 8 months to get sometimes an electric car. So what can happen if we don't review the CO2 standards and we don't push the transformation in Europe until 2029, that market will be filled by car makers from abroad. Chinese car makers are already entering European market. There's a number of competitive models. So it's a question of competitiveness. The CO2 standards drive the investments and supply. They don't drive so much the market. People are already in the market. They already want to buy these cars. And that's why it's so important. So Europe wins, and not Chinese, as happened in the solar power sector, actually, that Chinese actually fill up the European targets. So that's one answer on targets. Second of all, on infrastructure. I agree with a lot of things that have been said. We have to do more and better on charging infrastructure. But I would just be maybe more positive than Silke and Stephan. And I would say it's happening, it's doable, it's feasible. The good news is that there's a lot of industry, there's a lot of charging companies that really want this market. They cannot wait to build more charging stations. It's a huge market. It's a huge market opportunity for charging companies, for utilities, and so forth. Where I think we do have a problem with charging infrastructure today in Europe is the consumer side. Seamless use, maintenance, uptake requirements, very easy procedures to install it at home. So we've tried at TNE actually to install a charger in Brussels. It's a nightmare because of administrative procedures. So it's this side that needs to be solved. And there's a lot of things that the Commission can also do there by interoperability requirements to make it seamless and easy. That's important. But for the uptake of it, I have there's no one on the panel today from charging companies, but they can all tell you that they cannot wait and they see it as a big market. So the speed will come. And lastly, I will talk a little bit maybe about this indeed issue about less cars. So first of all, apologies if you can hear my noise. Obviously, someone is doing some works somewhere I can't control. Apologies. I hope it's not too annoying to everyone. So on the issue of having less cars, I can't agree more. I think in urban environments, really, most cars should actually go. We completely don't even need so many cars in cities. And I would argue that actually having a system that relies in urban areas, especially on shared and public transport modes, on active mobility, is a great way to deal with the existing fleet problem. You shift some of the polluting existing fleet to a more efficient ways and actually no cars. Shifting existing fleet to expensive low carbon fuels is not a solution. It's not affordable for people. However, just shifting and model shift is very, very important. And another thing that's really important here is to develop as fast as we can second-hand market for electric vehicles. That's why we work a lot on fleets. We see promoting and getting fleet electrification as the fastest route to have second-hand EVs for every European in 3-4 years' time. And where we also welcome actually a commitment in the smart and sustainable mobility strategy, Ms. Bakran is there as well, to do some actions on fleet electrification. That's very, very effective. But, and I want to end on this, because car CO2 standards are about new cars and the market, the sales of new cars, adding fleets into there to solve the fleet issue is not the right way. To solve the fuels in our wider fleet, we should be targeting fuels regulations such as Renewable Energy Directive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Stephan, you wanted to come in as well.
Yes, thank you. I would like to comment a lot of things, but I will concentrate on really two very, very important things from my point of view. First, Nigel, you ask for more risky targets. We can do so if we are talking about research. Yes, fully agree. But here we are talking about mobility of our society. And mobility is the backbone of our social and our economic life in Europe. So no risk at this area, no risk at this area. So we have to be realistic, ambitious, but realistic. The second point is, we at the end, we talk about the decarbonization of road transport, and we discussed the vehicle perspective. We discussed the infrastructure, and what else has to be discussed? It's the energy system as a whole. And here, look, we are mainly discussing electrification. So road transport electrification. The problem is that other sectors are also going for electrification. So the households, the heating, the industry as a whole, the chemical industry, the steel industry, everyone is going for electrification. So we need really, really a lot of electricity. And are we able to produce this electricity internally in Europe? No, this is daydreaming. So all the energy we need, or Europe still needs energy imports. And then we have to think in which manner we can import the energy to Europe. So we can produce electricity internally. Then we can maybe import a little bit electricity from Morocco or elsewhere. But we need also import for areas which are far away and where we can produce electricity in a very, very cheap way. And if you look at these areas, you will realize that we are not able to import electricity from these areas because we cannot use an electric cable from these areas. So we have to transform the electricity to a chemical energy carrier. And here we have hydrogen, and we have synfuels or A-fuels or whatever. And we have to keep in mind that the production of energies in certain regions is much more efficient than the production of electricity in Europe. So a windmill in Patagonia has 3 times more output than a windmill in a normal area in Europe. 3 times more. So there's a potential to transform it into chemical energy carriers and to bring it to Europe. And this is something what will happen. This will happen because we need it, because we cannot produce only the electricity and all the energy we need via electricity in Europe. So we will have these imports. And this is the third perspective for future mobility. We have to use all the different options in energy. This is electricity. It's good, it's needed. It's hydrogen, it's good, it's needed, and it's a chemical energy carrier like fuels, e-fuels, renewable fuels. They are good and they are needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That also helped to address some of the questions, partly at least, that the audience had posed about the role for renewable fuels. I'm very much aware of the time, and as we have only 5 minutes to go, I will give a chance for all of our speakers in 1 minute to give one recommendation, key message, and they would like to send out to the Commission and to the industry on what needs to happen now for the transition to accelerate and for us to green our road transport. And I'm very sorry, there were some other questions in the audience, and I'm aware that we weren't able to fully cover them all, but we will be sharing these with the speakers and we'll give them a chance to come back to you should there be anything. But I will just want to give a chance for all our panelists to have the final word. And if it's okay, Nigel, we could start with you.
Yes, I would say this is about competition, and it's about jobs, and it's about European jobs, European growth. Don't allow yourself to be swayed by non-arguments like it's just not going to happen. That's not an argument, that's an assertion. Or a bolder target is more risky, and I mean, I really think the idea that mobility is this sort of pseudo-moral argument that mobility is the background of society, and you're trying to push me to be riskier. No, I'm saying be realistic about the rate of change in the market and adopt competitive targets. That's a fact-based target based on the way we know that historically industrial transformations take. So I think that the Commission have got an incredibly challenging task in balancing all these things, but don't allow engineers to use non-engineering arguments and pretend that they're rational, because they're not.
Julia?
Well, I would just quickly say that just don't be scared to be bold. I think that's really, really important where we are today and where we want to go. If we don't have a leap of faith and we actually, go to the final objective and we continue discussing what today is better, what is feasible, what is not, that is not the point. We have a goal. The goal is zero emission in 2050 for the entire economy. For the road transport, it means that the market for new vehicles has to be zero emission at the latest in 2035. So set that objective. Set the objective to be zero in 2035 via the European-wide phase-out in vehicle CO2 standards, and allow the whole economy, industry, and trade unions, NGOs, society, cities to adjust and create the most efficient path there.
Thank you. Stephan.
Yes, thank you. So my conclusion is, please let us look at the vehicle fleet as a whole, not only on new vehicle registration, also on the existing fleet. And we have to discuss this together with the needed change in the infrastructure, as we discussed, and together with a total picture for the energy supply of Europe as a whole, including all sectors and not only road transport. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kris?
Thank you. I think it's very important to underline once again that the EIB is the first multilateral development bank to be Paris alighted. Put the money where your mouth is, and that is what we have done. And I hope that a lot of other very important financial institutions take us as an example. And of course, we look forward to work with the European Commission. And we are one of the most important partners, I think, to finance a lot of what is discussed in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Maja?
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody again. From my side, from our side here in DG Move in the Commission, we are again quite excited to be part of, to be on this journey. We are making our proposal based on facts, based on science, based on engineering knowledge, and then of course we once we propose and even slightly before, we are faced with political realities as well. So we will continue to try to find the right balance, and crucially, what we will also continue is to interact with all of you, with all the stakeholders, because together I'm pretty sure we can continue driving forward. So thanks again, and certainly thanks to EPC, Annika and colleagues for organizing this event. I hope it was interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I would just like to thank you again for the UK Presidency of the UN Climate Change Conference 2021 for supporting today's event. And thank you for our excellent panel for sharing your views, talking about the political realities, talking about your concerns, talking about the hopes, the expectations that you have. It's great to see the momentum on greening road transport, and I at least take the message from the discussion that Europe surely can play a major role in supporting these efforts, not only within our borders, but also beyond. So this is a good place from where to continue. And we, on the side of European Policy Centre, obviously are very keen to continue this discussion and look forward to engaging also with all of you in future discussions. Wishing everyone a very lovely afternoon and a good weekend. And I hope to see you all very soon again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.